May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another episode of Life in Bali. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic struggle, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So, you know what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read you a piece from Cat Wheeler's Bali Daze, Free Fall Off the Tourist Trail. Cat Wheeler, I think she came here in 1990. I think she started writing for the Bali Advertiser. I think it was the only English language publication then. And God, I haven't seen it recently. It's really good. It's really good. It has great articles. I have a friend that writes the medical article for it. I did a podcast with her, Kim, musician, and a doctor. Oh, well, sort of like a doctor, like a nurse practitioner. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, she's called Ibu Cat. Ibu is like Mrs. Mother, is what it's from, and which is what Katrinka is called also. But anyway, this is a piece from her book Bali Daze, which you can get from Amazon. It's great. That's Bali Daze, D-A-Z-E. So here we go. Gamelan nights. Love it or hate it, nothing is as evocative of Bali as the gamelan, and there is nothing so maddening, humbling, and entertaining as learning to play one. My musical career began and ended abruptly many decades ago when our grade 5 class was studying the recorder. I couldn't learn to read music and memorize the first 2 bars of the old French song by playing it so often that my poor father bricked my instrument into the basement wall one night when I was in bed. He still talks about it. I quit piano lessons after the first week because I couldn't make the connection between the squiggles on the score and what my hands were supposed to be doing. The sight of a piano keyboard still makes me apprehensive. But the gamelan seemed less structured somehow. The players at performances seemed to spend a lot of time drinking tea, smoking cigarettes, and cheerfully telling each other lies. So I decided to join the Ubud Women's Gamelan Group at the end of 2002. I'd done my homework. Nearly all the instruments were percussion, and none of them had more than 10 keys. Small boys could do it. How hard could this be? Well, harder than I thought. We were 25 women, about half from Bali and Java, and the rest from North and South America, Europe, and the Middle East. Our ages spanned half a century. Pak Goose, Pak's like Mr. Pak Goose, and Pak Made had been engaged to teach us, which they did by simply playing the same music over and over many times a night. We sat staring glazedly at them as we hammered away, trying to interpret the apparently random shrugs, scowls, and twitches which they used to direct us. To the Western mind, which expects to learn new subjects intellectually, this was maddening. There were no diagrams, explanations, demonstrations, or written music. The few women who had a clue what they were doing just played doggedly on, and the rest of us struggled to follow. Eventually, numbered labels were stuck to the bronze keys, and some of us started to scribble scores in the vein of 141414125224. This helped quite a lot. So did the beer, which was consumed in quantity by the foreigners during each practice. A gamelan has several types of instruments. Most of them have between 4 and 10 bronze keys and play the melody, harmony, and background bongs. They are played by hitting the keys with a little hammer, then pinching off the sound as you go on to the next key. This can get quite complicated when the tempo increases. A placid grandmother sits between two big gongs and whacks them at intervals. Then there is the freshly difficult rayong, a series of graduated fixed gongs which are played bonk 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 or bonk 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 or bonk 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 bonk, depending on the melody and the player's state of confusion. The rayong players, my Wayan Manis among them. Wayan Manis. Wayan means firstborn. Manis is sweet. Wayan Manis among them, where permanent expressions of intense concentration and bewilderment. Hi, airplane. Finally, there are two big drums in it. Cheng Cheng, T-J-E-N-G, a carved wooden turtle with 6 upturned cymbals fastened on its back, upon which another 2 cymbals are played. All these sections play different tunes and tempos at the same time. When played well, they knit together into a harmonious, complex tapestry of sound. When played by us for the first 3 months, the result was a discordant cacophony that made our teachers wince. By the time I joined the gamelan, the group had already been together for a couple of months. The only instruments still free were the flute and the cheng cheng. A flute is very much like a recorder, so I sat on the floor to acquaint myself with the turtle. It seemed straightforward enough, and I would be merrily clashing away until Bach Goose started sending me huge black scowls. I had never had any instruction and no idea what I was doing wrong. Too loud? Not loud enough? Wrong wrist action? But I was left to puzzle it over as he went on to shake 3 fingers at the rayong and roar, da-da-da-da, at the baffled drummers. I began to enjoy my 4 hours a week in the crystal cave of harmonics. During the breaks, while the teachers smoked, the women showed each other where the music went up and down and how to tell when to stop. I learned when to make crisp little sounds on the cheng-cheng and when to really give it the works. Ours was a very public education being held at the Pondok Pekock Library in plain sight of bemused tourists and curious Balinese. Laurie's 2-year-old son would caper about trouserless during our practice, occasionally grabbing a pair of drumsticks to show us how it should be done, and politely applauding us at the end of each set. He was our only fan. We were hopelessly bad. All through December, we practiced madly for our first gig, booked at the big temple in Pengosakan for mid-January. Every night, more Balinese men appeared to encourage us and help with the tricky bits. We clonked and clashed and bonged determinately through our 2-party pieces as the expression on Bach Goose's face grew ever bleaker. Then one night we got it. Like magic, the music finally entered our energy fields. which is the only way I can describe it, and became part of us. Our hands flew instinctively through the complex rhythms. We grinned and shouted and played on and on. Pot Goose smiled for the first time. The band of watching Balinese men clapped, which they had never done before. At last we were ready for prime time. On the appointed evening we donned with varying degrees of grace our uniforms of bright turquoise, kabaya, and sarong. To those unfamiliar with pakaian adat, or Balinese traditional dress, many Western women find it uncomfortable in the tropical heat. A balcony bra and broad elastic waist clincher form the infrastructure over which is pulled the tube top, a new tradition reaching from under the arms to the hips. Then the sarong is knotted tightly on, the lace blouse buttoned up, and the sash tied. It is all very tight and very hot. I decided to minimize the agony by foregoing the bra on the assumption that the newfangled tube top would hold the fort, so to speak. Just after dark, we climbed the temple steps for our premiere performance. 25 turquoise bottoms perched on tiny wooden stools, and 50 nervous hands picked up our hammers, sticks, and cymbals in unison under Pot Goose's watchful eye. The drummers tapped our cue, and we began to play. We played well, and we played for much longer than usual as a modest audience of friends, relatives, and Balinese watched us politely. Playing the gamelan can be quite energetic during the fast parts and requires both hands constantly. Halfway through the second piece, my tube top drifted from its moorings. Suzanne's nose began to run. Beth got a bug in her kabaya. Like true professionals, we soldiered on, with bland smiles, concealing our misadventures from the spectators whose eyes, fortunately, were beginning to glaze over. Flushed with victory, we returned to our next practice session to find ourselves at the bottom of the learning curve once more. Pot Goose launched us on our third piece of music without diagrams, explanations, demonstrations, or written music, but we were figuring it out much faster now. After a year of banging the wrong keys, missing cues, and watching our teacher sadly put his head in his hands at the end of practice, our women's gamelan group was finally getting it. We were actually pretty good. Things became easier once we foreigners stopped trying to learn the music intellectually. There is no conscious cerebral path to playing the gamelan. You just practice and practice until the music becomes part of your cell structure, a component of your energy field. It has nothing to do with your brain. Maybe that's why we Westerners, most of whom had never done anything musical, enjoyed it so much. Now that we were performing professionally, we donned our uniform of sarong and lace kabaya about once a month. We foreigners become quite expert at dressing ourselves, although our Balinese colleagues generally gave us a few tweaks before we piled into borrowed vans and headed off into the unknown. I don't know who organized our performances. We played in little family temples, in huge, awesomely decorated ones, in the mountains, and in a factory courtyard. We played at the local police station and were booked for a wedding. It was all enormous fun and generated a warm feeling of community between the women that transcended religion and ethnicity. At one ceremony in a village that shall remain unnamed, we filed demurely onto the stage in our tight kabayas that took our places. Immediately we were aware of a very adjacent pigsty, complete with flies and interesting smells. In fact, it seemed to be located directly behind the woven bamboo wall to the rear of the makeshift stage. The assembled throng stared at us expectantly. At that time, older Balinese were astonished to find Western women playing the gamelan. As I lifted the cymbals of the chang chang, I noticed that my sarong was already dotted with flies. The drummer tapped our cue, and we began to play. Legions of small, determined flies instantly gathered around us. Soon we were vigorously shaking our heads to get them out of our ears and noses. It seemed strategic to keep our mouths firmly closed. They strolled across our foreheads and tap-danced along the backs of our hands as we played. For some reason, they were particularly attracted to the harmonics of the chang chang and landed on it as if drawn by an irresistible force. Inevitably, some were caught in the flying cymbals, and a little pile of bodies began to collect in the upturned cymbals attached to my instrument, bouncing with each clash. It was quite mesmerizing. I was trying hard to behave myself, but the torment of all those tiny feet was impossible to ignore. Every woman in the gamelan was twitching wildly and shaking her head to dislodge the flies, since it was impossible to remove our hands from our instruments. Our audience watched impassively. Apparently, all the flies were on the stage with us. We took a brief break after the first set to compare casualties. I helped Ilu remove a bug from her eye. Wayan Manas had one in her ear. Several of us had numerous visitors in our cleavages, which were difficult to remove unobtrusively. Then, during the second set, a large cockroach made its way determinedly across the stage, heading directly for me. A bystander tried to head it off, but it veered quickly under my instrument, only to abandon its position after a particularly energetic riff. Our teacher smacked it to oblivion with a packet of clove cigarettes, and it joined a growing number of dead and dying flies on the frayed red carpet around us. I think we played pretty well, considering the distractions. The performance ended with the usual snack traditionally offered to performers to refresh them after their exertions. These cardboard boxes invariably contained a piece of fruit, a mound of cold rice, and half a hard-boiled egg, some noodles with vegetables, a splash of incendiary sambal, hot sauce, and some kind of meat. On lucky nights, it was a savory morsel of fried chicken. That night, it was little glands on a stick. Playing in the gamelan gave me a new identity in my own neighborhood. Once the big temple near my house had a major ceremony. Clad in full temple dress, I inched my battered car through a seething crowd of worshippers to the end of the jammed lane, where I was ordered to turn back. Then a neighbor recognized me and asked where I was going. I told him I was playing gamelan at a ceremony in Ganyar. Broad smiles appeared, and a path was made for me through the crush of people and vehicles. I noticed that more men nod and smile at me now when I pass them at the temple. That particular gig took us well beyond Ganyar to a village whose name I never learned. We were shown to a very small stage inside the temple itself and crammed ourselves onto tiny stools or minute patches of carpet. With the first two bars, it became agonizingly clear that the gamelan was tragically out of tune. We clashed on our party pieces while toothless old men stared at us unblinkingly. Then a squadron of lovely children, dressed for the dance, filed in to pray. When they filed out again, our whole audience followed them. Philosophically, we played our last piece to an empty house and were rewarded with an unusually savory snack. As I drove home that night through the moonlit rice fields with my little car full of joking Balinese, I realized that playing the gamelan is not just about making music together. It's about sharing the experience, sharing food, taking bugs out of each other's eyes, making sure one another's sashes are on straight, being a community within a community as we make music for the gods. All right. That's Ibu Cat on the gamelan. That's great. Okay. So, until next time, this is DC Poohbah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening. And here's some more gamelan music.